Hi, everybody. I'm Dennis Daly. I spent 20 years with United Press International, most of it with the old UPI Radio Network. And my favorite assignment was going on the road producing and hosting American Montage. It was an hour-long weekly program. Now here's an edited version of one of those shows. You're walking along a railroad siding. It's nearly 4 o'clock in the morning of April 30th, 1900. You're just outside of the little town of Vaughn, Mississippi. In the distance, a highballing train is approaching, but you can't hear it yet. It's trying to make up for lost time and to make its way to its destination farther south. But that train will never make it. Instead, it will make its way into history.
Come all year rounders if you want to hear a story about a brave engineer. Casey Jones was his name. On the icy road he won his fame. The man called Casey about 10:30. Gotta make a run to Canton again. Mounted to the cabin with his orders in his hand. Took a farewell trip to the promised land. Casey Jones mounted to the cabin. Casey Jones, orders in his hand. Casey Jones mounted to the cabin. Took a farewell trip to the promised land. It was early morning.
The world has changed a lot in the more than 100 years since Casey Jones rode his train into history. This sleepy railroad siding where that incident happened is no longer in an isolated area. It's no longer quiet here. It's beside a busy county road and just yards from an interstate highway. Thousands pass through this area every day, not realizing that they are passing by hallowed ground. The legend of Casey Jones is known around the world, but the legend is sometimes twisted. For some, it's the story of a reckless, fast-driving railroad engineer cannonballing his train through the fog to make up for lost time with faithful assistant Sim Webb at his side. For others, it's the story of courage, the story of an affable, gregarious, 6'4", strapping railroader in his mid-late 30s who would give up his life to save the lives of others in an unavoidable railroad accident that was not of his making. For those of us who know the true story, Casey Jones is truly an American hero. On the 100th anniversary of Casey's final trip, hundreds gathered in Jackson, Tennessee, Casey's home at the time, to hear the music, to listen to the old story being retold, and to visit with some of Casey's descendants. I had the pleasure of emceeing part of that ceremony, so stick around. We'll hear what went on that day. We'll hear from Casey's great-grandson. We'll hear some interesting variations on the ballad of Casey Jones, and a lot more. Ben Langford was a member of the Jackson, Tennessee City Council when the Casey Jones Museum was getting off the ground.
I can recall about 70 years ago that first thing that I learned, of course, was the alphabet and count to 100, taught to me by my mother before I entered kindergarten at the age of 4. But I can remember the first 4 or 5 things that I memorized: the Lord's Prayer, National Anthem, Pledge of Allegiance, 23rd Psalm, and Casey Jones song. I memorized all of those. And even though I am 76, I know them all today.
Speaking for Casey's descendants was Charles House, Casey's great-grandson.
I want to talk and focus on the emotions that were going on about 3:52 a.m. on April 30th, 1900. Casey was working out of Memphis. It was about 10 o'clock that night, April 29th to be exact. Casey and his fireman Sim had finished their run to Canton, Mississippi and back. They had checked out and were prepared to go home. Another engineer called in sick. Casey and Sim volunteered to double back, take the next run of the cannonball to Canton. The yard crew hooked 382 to the train, and around midnight, in the rain, they headed out southbound. Now it's about 3:50 a.m., April 30th. Casey and Sim are 2 or 3 miles north of the station at Vaughn. It's raining and foggy. They're running about 75 miles an hour. At that point, the track makes a long curve to the left. Seated on the right-hand side of the engine, Casey cannot see down the track because the engine blocks his view. Sim Webb had just finished firing the engine and had taken his seat on the left-hand side of the cab. He looks down the track And I wasn't there, but I know it must have been a second's hesitation. He sees two red dots off in the distance. He hesitates and says to himself, "What the heck is that?" And suddenly he realizes it's two red lanterns on the back of a caboose. He screams at Casey, "There's a train on the main line." Instantly, Casey jumps to the other side of the cab, looks down the line to see how far ahead. Back to the other side, throttle down, throw it in reverse, throttle back up, dump the sandboxes on the track to increase the friction between the wheels and the track. Lay back on that brake lever for all you're worth and lock it. Back to the other side, take another look. Oh my God, we're not going to make it. She's slowing down, but we're going to wreck. Sim, we're going to crash. Jump. Jump now. Sim jumps. Casey is alone. Now it's this moment, frozen in time, that I want you to remember, and I want to analyze that moment. Casey has already physically done everything he can to stop that train, and it's not going to be enough. He has a decision to make. Sim just went over the gangway. We know today that Sim survived the jump to tell the story for many years. The odds are highly favorable that if Sim survived, then Casey would have survived if he had jumped and likely been home with Janie and his 3 children that same day. But there were people on that train up ahead. There's a crew, and the crew normally slept in the caboose. Not that they were definitely there, but there's also people, a crew and passengers on Casey's train. I can feel Casey's emotions as I'm standing here. His adrenaline had to be pumping wide open, broke out in a cold sweat. The hair on his neck standing on end, heart in his throat, stomach in a knot. What do I do? Instantly, Casey makes the right decision. Those people have to be warned. They have to be given their best chance for survival. Casey lays down on that whistle cord and puts every ounce of over 6'4", 200 pounds into getting just a little bit more leverage on those brakes. Try to minimize whatever's going to happen. Well, we all know it wasn't enough, and that's why we're here. But I would suggest to you that that point in time is where a legend was born, and that point in time is where a hero was made. And that's what I want you to remember about Casey Jones.
Casey Jones, mounted to the cabin. Casey Jones, orders in his hand. Casey Jones, mounted to the cabin, took a farewell trip to the promised land.
Casey Jones was the only person killed. He lay as still as his dark, twisted engine under the cloud-laden sky. The heroic actions Casey took that night saved the lives of all his passengers and his crew. With the knowledge that his own life would be lost and all he loved left behind, Casey willingly gave up his life for others, creating a legend and a place in history for the bright-eyed boy who became a gallant engineer.
All kinds of heartaches, all kinds of pain, they all ride along on a railroad train. Stories of brave men, noble and tall, the greatest of them all was Casey Jones. Casey Jones, mounted to the cabin. Casey Jones, orders in his hand. Casey Jones, mounted to the cabin, took a farewell trip to the promised land.
I'm Dennis Daly. I say thank you and remind you to keep the memory of Casey Jones alive and bright for future generations. And there you have it, another edited episode of one of the American Montage programs prepared for the UPI Radio Network back in the 1980s and 90s. I'm Dennis Daly. Thanks for listening. Thanks for going with me this week. And check YouTube for more American Montage programs.